Greetings, immortal. Well, this world exists only for you. It's true. Because had you not come into being to see the world, therefore it wouldn't exist for you, as it wouldn't exist for me. But since you did come into being, then this is your world, as it is mine. So make of it what you will. Yeah, this is something I used to tell people back in high school, right? Or even, elementary school. I would say things like this to, just to, I don't know, get a reaction from people. But as it turns out, it's pretty well true. And this is going along with simulation theory. So, kind of like the whole if a tree falls in the forest, will it make a sound if nobody's there to hear it, right? And I always thought, that was a ridiculously stupid question, right? And as a youngster, I thought, well, of course it's going to make sound. But now I don't quite really prescribe to that. Because, if there isn't an observer, then why would the code be wasted? But I digress. Now, cut back, start out at the beginning, right? Now, one of the things that has always troubled me and I've always questioned is how I could possibly be related to my siblings because I am so much different than them. And they know it just as well as I do. I couldn't understand that, right, until, much later when I found out more about, or realized more about the circumstances of my birth. Out of my siblings, which were all born up in Fairbanks, where my mom and dad were still in a marriage situation. My father being very abusive. I was born in Anchorage, hundreds of miles away, and my mom was in an entirely different mindset because she had finally decided to leave my abused father and move all of us down to Anchorage, where my first memories are in the low-income housing that we grew up in for the first 7, 8 years of my life. And so I was also, born in the new Native Hospital, and the biggest difference was that my mom was no longer in the abusive relationship with my father, and therefore, going through a completely different experience herself, just free finally. And so I can understand, people say a lot about this DNA, but your DNA will actually change with your mood. Not all of it, not your genetics or anything like that, but 100% it will alter slightly and is constantly altering very slightly. So this is why I was so much different than them. And I finally figured that out, many years later. But the differences between myself being the youngest of six, well, actually seven. I had an older brother who died shortly after childbirth. And I don't even remember my father until, the first time he showed up. Because after my mom moved down with all his kids, he eventually followed after. And by then he was, My dad was a motorcycle rider, built Harleys, and he, he would show up, you hear this big, loud bike, bam, 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 and he'd be drunk, and open up, I want to see my kid. Now you got it, right? And I was terrified because I didn't know what this was, right? And I asked one of my older brothers, who's that? And they looked at me like I was literally retarded, right? That's Dad, right? Oh my God, that's Dad, right? But being the youngest, right, I was never, I don't have any memories of my mother and father being in a relationship like that because they were split up. But all of them, of course, do remember it. And so naturally, as an abusive father, they had to go through all that too, right? And not only that, but my father was a self-proclaimed cocksman, as he put it, and he was out to fuck everything on earth, well, every woman on earth, right? And so, he even tried to teach that to us when we were kids, right? It's okay to, fuck everything. And I did not go along with that. I never let anybody know that, right? Because I'd be a pussy or whatever then, right? And it was bad enough already as being the youngest. And I was constantly ridiculed by them and teased. And also, I suffered from weak bladder and bedwetting, right? And so I could tell that, one of my brothers just literally hated me for that. He was embarrassed. And eventually what had happened when the word got out when I was in junior high in Ringo, I was called the pisser, right? Literally known as that. So, but moving too far ahead here, we'd go back to growing up in Anchorage, or down in Anchorage, and I was a bit smarter than the rest, especially my closest sibling, my next oldest brother Sam, and he was a dumb kid, right? He was a bully and a brute, and he was barely above idiot, right? And I recall that I was in Head Start, right? They put me in the Head Start program, and he was in kindergarten, a year in front of me, and they're starting to teach you how to read then, and Sam was also very rebellious, right? And he hadn't quite caught on reading yet, right? But I had grasped it very quickly. As a matter of fact, I learned how to read in Head Start, right? And I was doing very well at it. I took to it very quickly. And word pronunciation, everything. And I remember they were talking about how Sam would have to be flunked, right? Might have to go back, might have to stay back a grade, and that I'd have to be in the same grade with him. And I didn't want that, right? I didn't want that, not because I didn't, we actually had kind of a close relationship back then. I just thought, no, he's got to stay ahead, right? He's got to get, I wanted him to, to learn. And so I actually taught him how. I taught him how to read, right? I think mostly he was getting it, or he wasn't getting it from being rebellious. And I remember very distinctly when I, you know, taught him how, first words and stuff, right? And it was quite simple, right? He was smart enough to get it, but he was just, you know, I don't know what it was, but whatever I had done to, right, when I was showing him, it clicked, right? And you could see it, and he read the sentence, and I said, there it is, you got it, right? And I was just proud, right? And he got this big grin on his face, and then the realization that his younger brother had taught him, right, hit him, and he just got this angry look immediately, right? He smiled, and he just immediately was pissed, right? And instead of punching me like he usually did, right, he turned and walked away, right? And I was like, wow, that was weird, right? But I was still happy for him, right? And so that was a change in our relationship. He began to bully me more and stuff like that. Crazy. I had this stupid joke that I made right after he passed away recently. Um, Even though he'd done unforgivable things. Um, I was having this. I was going to speak at his funeral, right? And I had this thing I was going to say. His last words to me, right? In reality, right? Very last words to me were almost his first words to me. His last words to me were something that he said all the time to me. As a matter of fact, I heard it so many times, it became like after you hear a joke so many times, it's not funny. It was like that, right? And it was just like, whatever. And his last words to me were "fuck you, punk," right? And he'd say that to me all the time. "Fuck you, punk." And at first, it would make me cry, right? When I was a little kid, well, yeah. But after so long, it was like, whatever. It did bother me a bit. And also, my family was big on nicknames, right? Everybody had a nickname. And mine, being the youngest, was Baby, right? Because it came from my mom. Because even I see in her writings, right? She'd always say, whoever was the youngest at the time was always referred to as the baby. And so, since I was the last in the sibling line, right? The nickname Baby stuck. And so I used to, I hated it, right? I hated it growing up. But now, I'm very proud to be my mother's baby boy, right? Because I used to think that I took after my father because of the resemblance, right? Until seeing, a younger picture of my mother and her smile, exact same smile. We have the exact same. And first time I heard somebody say that, you have your mother's smile, I never was more proud or more flattered to hear that. But growing up as the youngest to me, some people say, it was good. There was an advantage to it. No, shit went down the totem pole for me, right? And one of the worst things about it that I really disliked was the fact that I got nothing but hand-me-down clothes, right? Every piece of clothing I had was passed down because they were all much bigger. They grew faster, right? And so virtually everything I had was just a hand-me-down. I never got anything brand new because we were very poor. Until occasionally, like back to school clothing, I'd get one set of clothes that would be new, right? And so that was something that I always resented, was the whole hand-me-down thing, right? On the flip side of that, though, there was never any shortage of shit for wear, right? I was always constantly getting a lot of. I had plenty of stuff, but getting back to the whole point of this bit for this time, right, is what I said in the beginning. This simulation is your simulation, and this has been also proven by the likes of Tesla and whatnot, and the whole you create your reality, right, by your thoughts and your vibration. And as Tesla said, you want to know the secrets of the universe, think frequency of vibration. And also the guy that went into the 39-day trance, his name eludes me right now, but when he came out of that, right, he brought back much knowledge of the universe. And he said, light and dark, there's no difference, right? Good and evil, right? It's two ends of a spectrum, the same thing as all it is. Good and bad, whatever, all of it. It's just a yin and yang. One can't exist without the other. The other thing I used to like to say to people, right, to freak them out or make them think, is I would say, I am not afraid of death. I think death is death is good, because without it there would be no life. And then, everybody would get blown away by that. And so I had a completely different. I mean, I believe that too right off the bat. And I've never been afraid to die. Right. As a matter of fact, I no fear of it all, because I knew it was not really the end. Just instinctively, it was ingrained, just hardwired into me, right? And it's also hardwired into me that if it ever did happen, right, it would be until the very end of this very existence, because I just instinctively knew that, and it becomes more and more apparent that that's the truth, because as the astral plane no longer wants me on it, right? I'm not lucky. I say this. I'm not lucky enough to get out. I'm not lucky enough to shrug the mortal coil to attain my full power. The last thing they want, that the universe wants to happen to me, right? And I don't know if that sounds arrogant or whatever. If you feel that way, be a shortcoming, not mine. And anybody who's afraid of death, I chuckle, right? Oh, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of getting your full power? What? Afraid of ascending? What the, right? It's just ridiculous to me. And to counter that, though, of course, I will never try to make happen. Of course, I can't. Right? That would negate the entire test that this physical life is. And if you do that, you're going to get shoved back in the match. You have to go through this fucker again. And the last thing I want to do is that. So it's very hilarious, because when the crew here, Kristen Slowboy Whiteboard is the name of her channel, right? She immediately referred me to this guy, Nathan Wheeler, who I'm listening to now, right? And I mean, there's so many opposites and similarities. But he said he was constantly worried about dying when he was a kid. And I was like, well, that's the exact opposite thing that I was worried about. But I did worry about everybody else, right? Even the world, for that matter, right? So I learned these things in school about radiation and pollution, and yeah, I was way more worried about the human race than about myself, right? I knew I was good. And then other people too, right? People in my family, right? And like in the song I wrote, or the poem I wrote that became the song, right? Death is something I don't fear unless it's for someone I hold dear. And that's 100% true. Because when my mother passed, finding her cold and dead on the floor here in this very room, literally, it was like being chopped, my legs chopped down from under me, and just put me back to square one. And I was far removed from where I am now. As far, I mean, I'm a shadow of my former shadow as far as confidence goes. Back then, I mean, dude, yeah, night and day. Back when life was good, as I refer to it, but no, it's getting better. It's good again. So the grief. This will be a good way to segue out of this one. Okay. As far as death goes, I've been around it my whole life because we grew up in a fishing boat, right? And we would face life and death all the time. And so, how you hear stories about people who have a near-death experience, kind of like this guy I'm listening to, Nathan Wheeler, right? And I still don't know how he almost died, right? Or whatever. But it would happen all the time. So it was a common thing, but like when some people have a near-death experience, it'll make them look at life an entirely different way and change their life completely, and they'll go and live the spiritual way or whatever. Or you hear about this all the time. Life-changing experience, almost dying, right? And they learn to smell the roses, blah blah blah. And so for us on the boat, right, we were having all the time, and so we went through that experience every year, right? And it wasn't that dramatic for me either, right? I mean, the first time I was nearly killed was Um, I'm sure there was many times, right? But one of the most, uh, let's say everybody knew, one of the most apparent ones of it was when we were first year down on the boat. I was just going into seventh grade, so somewhere around that age, and we were at this creek, and we were getting some of the chum salmon, dog salmon, right? We were dip netting them out of the falls for halibut bait, right? And we were allowed to do that, and so we were doing that, and we had our skiffs all full of of all these salmon, right? And we had to guide them down the slow-moving creek down to where the boats were anchored, and we had an inflatable Zodiac, very stable, very cool boat, and the other family we were with, the Torgelsons, Uncle Charlie's kids, Corey and Ted, right, and Myrna, they called her sis. Uh, their skiff was just it was a Lund, it was aluminum, it was much more unstable and harder to handle than ours was, right? The Zodiac was like, I love that skiff. That was my favorite little boat, right? I was always in that boat, right? And so we're floating down. We had no outboards on or anything like that because we brought them up the creek in the shallows, right? So we're floating them down, and we had to guide them down to where they didn't get on the rocks or anything like that. It was very easy to begin with, and most of the way all along, until there was a bend in the creek, and there was a little outcropping of rocks. Not an island, but they call it an islet, right? A little area where the rocks were above the surface, and as we came down around it, right, uh, we had to guide the skiffs around it, and I was a little kid the first time I ever did this, and not realizing how much weight was in those skiffs, and I had traded our good floatable skiff, the Zodiac, for their skiff because Ted was kind of I could see his eyes wide, right? He was having trouble guiding it, and I said, "You want to switch?" And he says, "Will you?" And I said, "Yeah." And so I let him guide the much easier to handle Zodiac while I was handling theirs, right? So I was a little bit better of a swimmer, we'll say, and plus no fear, right? And when we got down around that bend, the skiff, I was trying to push it off the rocks, and then I realized, oh, holy shit, this is like 2,000 pounds of fish right there. That my scrawny little ass was going to do it. It wasn't going to affect it, and realized it far too late. I was already in the bite, so to speak. Never getting the bite, right? But like I said, my first year around any of this, and so, but I realized it at the last minute what was going to happen, right? I was going to get trapped between this heavy skiff and the rock, right, and stuck. And I was, you know, I'm my head is just at the same level of the skiff too, right? So, right, this close to the water, right? And I was like, oh shit! And so immediately I tried to duck under it and go underneath, so that way I wouldn't get pinned, right? And so I almost made it. I get down under it. It caught my head, got caught by the skiff and the rock on either side, and I was just stuck right. I get stuck right in everything, and it just stopped. Everything just stopped. Right, there was no more motion. I was like, "Fuck!" And at this point, I wasn't even afraid of drowning or anything like that. I was more afraid of looking stupid. Right, everybody would be like, "Oh, you dumbass!" Right, that kind of thing. I did. That was the least thing that I wanted to happen. Right, and so I mean, I could see the surface of the water. It was just I could see it, and so I was like, and I could still hear them yelling too, right? Because they seen what had happened, and they're like, "Oh, I already went under, right?" And I was like, "Fuck, I can't have this." And they're all yelling, "Dad, Dad, Dad!" Right? My dad couldn't swim, right? So I could hear it splashing up above. Right? I was like, "Oh shit, that's the last thing we need to see him in the water." And so I was like, "All right, I got to get out." And so I just kind of I balled myself up into a little ball, right? And I put one hand on the skiff, one on the rock, and I just literally just wrenched my head out of it. And I had two cuts on my ears, right? Sliced the tops of my ears both. But no big deal, right? I got out. I was popped out of it, and I was so stoked, right? Because I ducked underneath it, pushed off on the rock, and shot out the other side of the skiff. I was short of breath or anything like that. I was no fear whatsoever. I wasn't afraid at all. I was like more worried about the embarrassment of it. And so, and plus I wanted to get out there fast enough to where you know, the old man wouldn't get into the deep water coming across, right? Shout out. I came up like, I'm good. I'm good. It's all good. Everything's cool, right? And everybody's like, okay, everything's good. And so I grabbed a whole skiff on that side and started to guide it as it started to go down, like the side I should have been on. I realized that. And so that was the first time that, you know, really, it was really apparent that I would have been dead for sure within, you know, short amount of time had I not. And I don't know how it's strength to do that, right? As a scrawny little kid. And of course, I'm going to go back to, I've always felt as though there's an angel watching over me, right? The angel, which is actually just your immortal soul, your higher self, which usually is above you, guiding you through this experience. Barely will ever get involved. And I always attribute that to the the, the smart voice in your head, not the incessant chatter voice, right? The one that's constantly fucking won't shut the fuck up, right? Just constantly, I worried about this, worried about that. That ego voice, right? That possessing entity, as Eckhart Tolle would put it, right? The part of your mind that controls you. Not that voice. No, the one that rarely ever speaks, if ever, and always is smart, it says the right thing. Your intuition voice, right? That rare one. That's the higher self. And always have been able to follow that one. Anytime I've ever not followed it, always pay the price, right? And so, if it's life and death, I always listen to it. But if it's just something, you know, trivial, even though I'm still trying to learn that one, still, and I'm not going to say I'm stupid because I'm not. Never talk bad about yourself, right? Try to break that habit too. Everybody do. We all do it. But we're almost on 30 minutes already. God, these things go fast. How about we just leave with this one then? As we move on towards the other things that became gifts and curses in my life. I've never been psychic or anything like that, but getting back to how this world exists only for you, because had you not come into conscious being to observe, to see it, to be in it, therefore it wouldn't exist, because you wouldn't exist, and so, you know, the one cancels the other. But growing up as a Christian, and I always had, you know, faith in a creator or a supreme intelligence or a being, so to speak. I don't want to say God because that's the religious moniker. And the first thing about any religion that I felt is that people actually believe this shit. God, what a con, right? What a con job. What a religion. Every one of them is merely a control device that men use to control other men, right? It's a fraud. It's a con game. It's a confidence game. It's a fucking scheme, right? Do good and get this, get this carrot or get this coal, or, you know, it's like the Santa Claus fucking thing, right? And you know, how everybody teaches their kids that fucking lie to begin with. You know, the best way to start a relationship is by lying, right? Fuck. Of course not. But we'll say we have all been taught the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, right? Top of the pyramid. The Creator, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Now, I'll tell you what that simile is for mind, body, and spirit, right? Your mind, the Creator. Body is the Son, right? The flesh. And spirit, of course, is your Holy Spirit. So, you are the Trinity. As I am, as everybody is. So I say it's all within you. There it is. So, yes, it's absolutely your world. Do with it what you will. Make of it what you will. Make nothing or make everything. Do it all or do not. Right? You can do whatever you want. When Sam Tripoli asked me, how do you feel on simulation theory? I said, absolutely, 100%. These molecules These particles that make up your physical body are your avatar. The body is a dwelling place for your soul during the physical experience until you finally get to shrug the mortal coil, right? And so, absolutely, the soul is you, the player. The body's your avatar. And the only way you can affect this world is by changing yourself. You can't change the world. Go ahead, try. Try sometime. Go ahead. Move some rocks around or whatever, right? Look at it. Usually you change a little bit that way, but the only way to change it is you must first change yourself. And I've always known these things. These were innate. And one of the things that when I try to talk about these things to other kids when I was growing up, I had no idea what I was talking about. And it dumbfounded me. I always used to think that, everybody thought the same way I did, right? Yeah, I start to realize that in school that, like, wow, none of them think this way. But every once in a while I'd still think that, right? I see how people couldn't reason things out the way I did, or, all that. But, so remember that yes, this world's absolutely, it's 100% yours. 100%. And if you worry about things, you'll make them happen. And I used to, of course, think, and still kind of do, right, that manifestation is very easy when you're on the negative. One negative thought, the universe manifests that fucking times 10. You sit there and have all these positive thoughts, right, forever. And but one negative, boom. Oh yeah, here you go, done. But that's because manifestation is much more likely to happen if an emotion is attached to it, a strong emotion. And so the negative, when you're depressed, the negative emotion very strong and very easy. Where happiness seems light and airy compared to it, right? But anyway, so that's how this one will conclude: is that you have the power, all power of the universe within you. Remember that. Always remind yourself of that. That's why I never worry about, any stupid death or any fucking anything, any physical harm, none of that. Never worried about it because it's not going to happen. It never will. Even if somebody was to come up and put a gun to my head and pull the trigger, it would fail. Because nothing works unless I want it to. Everything will fail. Every weapon brought against, that's what they mean by that. Every weapon brought against you will fail. And it will. Remember that. Constantly remind yourself that. And always remember that you are the light, the shining light, and you are mortal. It's easy to not age when you don't believe in it. So, all right, we'll close it down. And we're going to go through some of these things as we go, and different things that I've learned. And hopefully maybe some of this will help you to create beauty in this world. The final thing I'll say is like, okay, this is a theory that I came up with recently too, with the simulation theory, right? Of course, it makes sense that not everybody in the simulation is a player, especially if there's billions of fucks on the earth, which I don't believe either. But most of them are programs. They're part of the fucking simulation. And an easy way to figure that out is if you're having a great life and everything's going good, you're a program. And if you're having a tough life and struggling and you have to fucking claw your way through it, you're likely a player. Because players are here to be tested. And if you're constantly being tested and have to overcome and learn and grow, likely you're a player. And so also, when people, like, they're very close to you, like if somebody passes too, right? Best friend or whatever, the one that had the good life, that was programmed in your test. See how you react, that kind of thing, right? I would estimate that probably maybe 5% of the people in this simulation are players. The great brunt of them, including all my siblings, are all programs. They can't fall outside the parameters of their programming, right? You always wonder can't they get it, right? Because it's not in their programming. So remember that one. You're the player. And as far as the directions go, 4 sacred directions: northeast, southwest, up and down. There's a 7th sacred direction, and that's right here. And you're the angel of that direction. It's your responsibility. All right, big love. And we're going to catch you next time. I'll see you very soon. Give somebody a hug. Boost your immune system now. That's another one of the secrets is always improve the dwelling place, not your home. You're sure your home, but the dwelling place of the soul, your body. If you're constantly improving it, you'll be healthy and you'll get through this very easily. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.